Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod, rockfin.com/aroundtheempire. Also, please like, share, and subscribe. Tom Luongo joins us today. We talk about the financial aspect of war and foreign policy, central bank wars between the Fed and the European Central Bank, the World Economic Forum, and the Great Reset. In the bonus segment, we talk about how the sanctions and trade disputes with China were condemned when Trump was in office, but have been resurrected under Biden, and it now seems that trade war with China is back in fashion. Tom Luongo is an analyst, a writer, and a former research chemist. His specialty is markets analysis informed by geopolitics. He publishes a blog, Gold, Goats, and Guns, a podcast, and a monthly investment letter. He contributes at Newsmax Media, and he's published by and does commentary for many other media outlets. We recorded this on July 16th, 2021. Tom Luongo's here, speaking to us from Florida. Hello, Tom. It's great to see you again. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you for the invite. As always, Joanne, I hope you've been well.
Doing pretty well. These times are interesting. So
yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
Downright scary is another way of putting it. So
exactly. This is a war and foreign policy podcast. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we neglect too much, I think, is the financial side of war. I mean, we talk a lot about sanctions and things like that. We talk, that's kind of in the foreign policy establishment, if you will, and even in the independent, really sanctions is probably the only aspect of financial war that gets talked about.
Right.
But you've been talking about some other things in terms of central banking wars, mm-hmm. and how that plays into the Great Reset and other big plans. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably not controversial anymore to say that it looks like there is an engineered collapse being worked on, right? So I don't think that's considered conspiracy theory anymore.
Well, not in this house. I don't know about anybody else's house. I'll be honest with you, but certainly not in my house. What I think is going on here, and it's a very subtle thing that a lot of people may have missed, and I covered it in a series of podcasts and eventually, a pretty long blog post recently, that I think June 16th was a seminal day in geopolitics. Not only did Biden and Putin meet for summit in Geneva, but at the same time, that summit was scheduled for the same day as the scheduled FOMC policy meeting. And at that policy meeting, the Federal Reserve came out and shocked markets. And now those two things together should always, set off your spidey sense, your geopolitical spidey sense, because there are never any coincidences. Because they could have scheduled that summit for any week. I mean, I know they take a long time to put together and blah, 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 and hundreds of people involved and all of that stuff, but they could have delayed a week. They could have done it for June 9th or, the 23rd, or even after the end of the quarter, right? Especially if they didn't want to upset financial markets. They would have waited until after June 30th, when the banks are done dressing up their balance sheets for the end of the quarter, and everybody's, doing their book squaring thing, to book their quarterly profits on their hedge funds and yada, yada, yada. Right. But no, they squarely 2 weeks before the end of a pivotal quarter, we have this major meeting between Biden and Putin, which no one in the geopolitical space, both conventional or even, alternative like we are, gave very high hopes for there being any kind of breakthrough on, right? So I had to just simply ask the question, why those two things on the same day? And why was this summit downplayed and everybody ignored the Federal Reserve changing two technical interest rates, and then the market's going completely crazy all at the same time? Now, to me, that just sparks my head spinning. I'm like, well, what does this mean? It took me a couple of days to figure it out, right? And I wrote a post for my patrons privately which eventually I look back on and I went, I doesn't scratch the surface of what I think has happened, because it became very obvious to me that something else is going on here. So
yeah, because the summit itself seemed like kind of a nothing burger, right?
well, it does on the surface, right? But there's been a lot of this, and I have to give a lot of credit to Alexander Mercouris over at the Duran, because Alex has been doing unbelievable work recently, certainly since he started his own YouTube channel, Just Beyond the Duran, where he's going through the diplomatic statements of the various calls between all of these heads of state, between Biden and Putin, between Putin and Merkel, between Macron and Erdogan, and blah, 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 and all of these things, and going through and parsing through the diplo speak to get to the nuggets of real information. And I heartily recommend everybody watch what Alex has been doing recently. I'm going to speak with him on Saturday for a long 2-hour chat.
Odyssey and
BitChute and Super U and Rumble, and they're everywhere. So you can find them, and they're on YouTube still as well. And so I can't wait to sit down and chat with Alex about synthesizing some of this stuff. And we're going to do that tomorrow morning, as a matter of my tomorrow morning, their tomorrow afternoon. But because we're recording this on a Friday. So what popped into my head, and it just goes back to things that I've been hearing, synthesizing all these things that I've heard about the Great Reset and Davos's plans and all of these things that have been happening. And they all just sort of kind of came together and collapsed into one big thing, which is this. What if, and I've been saying this for months, and I think I might have even said it the last time I was on the show, that you have all of these different factions within the crowd that makes up what we call Davos, right?
Yeah.
And they all have the same agenda. They're not all a bunch of, dyed in the wool doctrinaire commies who just wanted to put us in all in the Mao suits and make us, march in unison and sing the party, sing the happy songs all day and take our soma. That's not reality. The reality is that there's 10, 12, 15, 18 different little factions, and they've all been bribed to go along with the Great Reset for a variety of reasons, most of which is they all feel the exact same anxiety about the future that we do, which is that they can see the system collapsing. They can see what's been happening. They understand what's going on, and they're worried about preserving their power and their little piece of the pie. And so what Schwab has done very effectively, and Martin Armstrong made this point, I'm not sure if he made it publicly or if he made it on a private blog post, because I'm subscribed to his basic service over there. But he made this point beautifully the other day. And he said, and I disagree with Martin about certain things, but on this point, I certainly don't disagree, which is that Schwab bribed everybody and gave them the ultimate solution to their problem. He laid it all out for them, which is basically, we're going to remake the world along Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century means. We're going to do it this way. You're going to get your piece. You're going to get your piece. You're going to get your piece. And we're going to save the global financial system as it currently, the people who currently run it. We're going to make a new system, but you're all going to still be part of the new system.
The winners and losers,
What's that?
You'll be in the winner circle.
Right. You'll be in the winner circle, and the same people who are in the loser circle will lose even harder. And that's you, me, and everybody else listening to this. And so once you wrap your brain around that idea, then what happens if Davos doesn't win? What happens if they've always, and people go along with this stuff because they always seem to win, right? They pull the strings behind the curtain here, and they get the UK, and they get rid of Margaret Thatcher, and they get the UK into the EU. The EU is able to win in this area and bring these people in there, and they're able to win this. They're able to win this war in this place that they started. Blah 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 blah. But what has happened over the last 7 or 8 years? This cabal of people started losing, and it started with the moment I became geopolitically aware, and I had my big mimetic collapse and realized that something was changing. And that was the day that the British Parliament told David Cameron, no, we're not invading Syria, along with Barack Obama. When my wife was watching, my wife was
oh, I remember
the
that
Drudge
day
Report,
very well.
and she said, and she blurted out that headline from the Drudge Report, and I said, what? And I said, repeat that statement. And I went, okay, I need to now start following this aspect of the world a lot closer than I have been, because I had been just
especially
kind of
Syria. It's like
especially. Yeah. I just something triggered in me Because at that point, I was really just a gold, I was just really just a kind of doctrinaire libertarian gold guy, whatever. It's all corrupt. It's all going to collapse, and I don't care. And I had already checked out at that point. Just buy gold and don't worry about anything. Maybe buy some Bitcoin. I don't care. But at that moment, I realized this is big. Something is changing here. And then Putin moves into Syria in 2015, and then they start losing, and then all the narratives start to collapse. And so I just want to put that in back of people's mind when we get to this moment. I'm not going to go through all of it because it would take 3 hours to go through.
Yeah.
But just understand that systemically speaking, Davos has actually been losing piece by piece, bit by bit over the last 8 years as people have woken up to the point where this is not what they want. They don't want to be frog marched into a technocratic dystopia where we all have to wear mouse suits. We just don't want to do this. And Brexit happened when it wasn't supposed to happen. Trump got elected when he wasn't supposed to be. These were major losses for these people. And Jordan Peterson, I don't always like to quote Jordan Peterson, but I think it's relevant here, which is that he talks about human beings organize themselves in competence hierarchies, not necessarily dominance hierarchies. Leftists firmly believe in nothing but power and dominance hierarchies and the rest of it. I don't believe that. And I agree with Peterson on this point. And I think that the most stable human relationships or organizations are built on competence. Those will last the test of time. And so as long as you are competent, you can remain at the top of the hierarchy and you can continue to lead. But when you're not competent, when you start to lose and you start to make bad decisions, then all you have left is force. And then it becomes a dominance hierarchy. Then it becomes a hierarchy built on force, and hierarchies built on dominance through violence are metastable and short-lived. So fast forward to where we are today. Series of stinging losses. They couldn't take over Ukraine. They lost in Syria, Brexit, Trump, Belarus failed. They can't get the Russians to break down. Orban refuses to knuckle under in Hungary. We can go on and on and on and on. Yeah, they win over on things like Italy because the Italians are the political system there is completely corrupt and has been, because honestly, the Club of Rome is where all this stuff started anyway, right?
And Greece too, I guess you could say Greece.
Yeah, I mean, so like the Club of Rome and other guys along those lines. But I mean, certainly the Club of Rome was the original, like, Malthusian, world and secret society that wanted to control population. It's like the Club of Rome is really important in this discussion, but I'm not going to go deeply into it. Just know that it's like in there in the background. It's why Italy was never gonna be allowed to be free, right? So all this is a long-winded lead up to what I think happened on June 16th, which is the following: Biden was sent by Davos to sue for peace in the war of Davos and the EU versus Russia. There are still plenty of forces within the EU that are not happy about this. Mark Rutte, the Netherlands, the Baltics, Poland, the Brits and the neoconservatives within the British Empire are livid over this, right? And the same thing with the neoconservatives here in the United States. They're livid. And again, all of these disparate factions, they all coalesced around getting rid of Trump, right? But now their agendas are all splitting off into different, right?
It was always going to happen. Yeah.
It was always going to happen. The best, I like to, every time I talk about this, I think about that scene in Patton where he says, I got the right instrument at the right place at the right time. All I need is a few miserable gallons of gasoline. A moment like this will spin off into oblivion. A moment like this won't come again for 1,000 years. He was thinking in terms of becoming, the next Alexander the Great and all this other stuff. But he was right in that, in the sentiment, which is that all of these things have come down to this one moment, and they got everybody on board to get rid of Trump, which they were successful at, but at what cost? And the cost was way too high because it black-pilled and red-pilled too many people. I mean, I just got finished speaking with a family I just met about this and how many of them were red-pilled completely by the election here in the United States. So many people have 75 million Trump voters just woke up and went, we don't have a country. Now what? And they're scared and they don't know what to do, right? So Biden was sent to sue for peace in that war because Davos finally understood that when they pushed things to a crisis point in Ukraine, where we nearly got involved, we had the most dangerous geopolitical event since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, yeah. And
without a doubt, right? I don't know how you feel about it, but that's the way I've read.
No, most recently, I thought we were in the recent flare up, I thought that was it. I thought we were going to war.
Yeah, I was there. I was convinced of it too. And then Putin like put all his cards on the table. And those cards were, look, if you go any further in Ukraine, I've got Mach 9 weapons sitting on the border, and I'll take out every logistical space in that is important to NATO across the European continent. And I'll sink the navies. I will do all of that. And this will not end. This does not end at the contact line of Gorovka in the Donbass. This is a European-wide conflict. And I think that the Biden-Putin summit was meant for the militaries of both the US and the Russians to explain to the politicians, to explain to the Victoria Nulands and Jen Stoltenbergs and all the rest of them, oh, by the way, you can't win this one. I've always said that civil wars or wars of any kind can be started by spooks, but they're always ended by the military. Now in Ukraine,
can I just interject one thing?
Sure.
I think Putin made an unusual statement too during that time. He said something like he's going to retaliate where the decisions are made.
Exactly.
I've never heard him say anything like that before. Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
That's one of the things that I was like, oh shit, this is,
right. But at the end of the day, you have to think about, you have Putin, the hard man on one side, and you've got all these feckless, weak politicians on the other. Did you really think that Putin didn't have this psychologically game planned? I did. I mean, I said, if they push, and we could have went to war. And I think that what happened is, and I defer to some of my contacts who live in Russia and the various people and Russian media, which said the Ukrainian army infantry was pulled by their commanders, and they refused to go to war. They refused to invade. And because of that, Davos and NATO threw a war, and Ukraine refused to show up.
I mean, that's surprising. I mean, that was the situation. I mean, we saw it play out in Eastern Ukraine in 2014 or 15.
Yeah.
Where, they were just deserting on the streets in Eastern Ukraine. That one town that starts with an S, I can't remember the name of it, but so even with all the all the training and equipment, and I would think getting rid of some people and filtering people out, so it hasn't improved since then. They still
70. When I understand, 70% of the Ukrainian infantry refused to fight, refused to cross the contact line. That was the moment where they didn't have, where like, hey, you're going to throw a war, but we're not going to show up. And at that point, they had nothing left, and they had to sue for peace at that point. And then Putin made it abundantly clear that, look, I have the technology. And when you really start to look at, I've talked with various people about this who know this stuff better than I do. So I don't pretend to be an expert in NATO's logistics or the layout of their forces or dispensation or any of that stuff. But from the people that I've talked to who do care about this stuff far more than I do, they're like, oh no, we got 70% of NATO's armor is in Greece to protect against the Turks. One missile taking out a rail line and you trap all their armor in Greece, and Putin can take Paris in 2 weeks if he wants. I mean, seriously. And the fact is that Putin's not interested in taking Paris. No. He never has been. It's always been a lie created by Perfidious Albion
for a lot of other reasons, but
it's a disaster it's a disaster for everybody. It's a disaster for Russia. It's a disaster for Europe. It's a disaster for the world. He has no interest in this, and he's made this abundantly clear. Putin's foreign policy has always been about stability, preserving as much of the stability as possible, and then allowing change to happen organically and gradually. If change is going to occur, which is going to happen, here's how we handled Yanukovych in Ukraine. And Yanukovych had been, ready and willing to accede to new elections and possibly even share power or whatever needed to happen. And we spun up a friggin' color revolution on the Maidan and said no, because Putin got Yanukovych to not sign the accession agreement into the EU. It's the EU that started that fight. Everybody wants to blame the United States. So much of what's wrong with, I think today, after 7 years, 8 years of doing this, of the prominent voices within the alternative media space. These are people we all know, we've interviewed, we've talked with, and we respect. Too many of them keep wanting to blame the U.S. without looking at the real problem, which is
that's interesting.
And I'm serious. I'm talking about people like Pepe Escobar and Caitlin Johnstone, and I'll name names here. I don't care. I'm done with the nonsense. The U.S. is absolutely guilty of any number of these problems, but it's not the only thing going on here.
Right. Like
Europe is not a victim of U.S. aggression.
The vassal state, the puppet state kind of thing.
That's
wearing a little thin, particularly over the Trump years. I think that veneer wore off a little bit. Mm-hmm. So
I used to feel that way, but the more I used to be there. I used to listen to this, and I used to think that way. And the more I watch it play out, and it became really obvious during the election season with the color revolution attempt in Belarus, with the Merkel backing the Navalny poisoning and all of this. I'm like, oh, come on. This is Davos through and through. We are not setting policy for this. This is not what we want at all. And it was so very obvious that once Biden was selected, whatever you want to call it, and then inaugurated, that everything has been working right down the line to support what Davos is trying to pull off. So now the question is, which we haven't even gotten to your original question, which is this: is there a split between the central banks? Right? Is there a split within the cabal? Is it real? I think it is. And I think it is for this reason. Again, go back to June 16th. Why did the Federal Reserve shock markets when no one was expecting them to do so, and raise and start paying 5 basis points on the reverse repo contracts, and raise interest on excess reserves from 10 basis points to 15? That's all they did. And yet it sent the markets completely ballistic.
Which means what? That they didn't see it coming?
No, what it meant was, that's one. Two, that the Fed knew exactly what to do to be able to pull hundreds of billions of dollars worth of overseas liquidity out of the markets. This did not get pulled out of domestic money markets. This got pulled out of overseas markets. Mm-hmm. This was a shot across the bow to Christine Lagarde and the ECB. Remember, go back a month before that. Lagarde and Powell have a fight publicly on a Zoom call where she says, we need to coordinate global central bank policy to fight climate change. And Powell looked at her and laughed at her and said, excuse me, as the Federal Reserve Chairman, my job is the dual mandate of full employment and stable prices in the United States. Climate change has nothing to do with it. And she got pissy, publicly upbraided him. He went back at her. It was a bad call. It ended badly. And then a month later, 5 basis points. Deal with that, hon.
That's interesting. Was that a private call that people leaked about, or was that like you could see that publicly?
No, they didn't leak it to anybody. They came out with it. They changed it here's another. So
they edited that
a little bit of this. His cover was that imbalances within the reverse repo facility had already been spiking. Zero Hedge been running multiple stories on this. Everybody was talking about it. The money markets rates in the U.S., short-term money market rates, overnights out to 3 months, were all pegged at 0%, but they can't go negative because we're the reserve currency of the world, right? They can go negative in everywhere else, but they're not going to go negative here. No one has the balls, pardon my French, to bid negative rates on U.S. money market funds. So Jeff Snyder over at Lombard Partners wrote at the time that he thought, well, the Fed raised that repo rate to find out how out of balance the market was, because it was pegged at 0, but it really wanted to go negative. So if you're raised by 5 basis points and the money market short-term rates don't rise commensurately so that they trade at 5 basis points, then we can find out what the latent demand was and how deep it actually wanted to go. And he was right. They rose up to about the short-term rates rose up to about 3.7 basis points. So there's about a point, basis point and a half of latent demand for collateral still built into the repo system. So this was an issue. So that was the Fed's cover story to allow that to happen. I think it has more to do than that, because remember, other things I think we might have talked about the last time I was on. Part of the Great Reset is getting rid of the commercial banks.
Yeah, this is.
And because they don't need them. When the central banks can issue script directly, can issue digital programmable money to you directly through your account. Oh, by the way, Biden came out yesterday or the day before and said, oh, we need to make cell phone repair a human right.
I saw the right to repair thing. It's
Yeah.
like, what?
That's because you cannot be without a digital. If you don't have a phone, then you can't have any access to the banking system going forward.
I saw that the ECB said, yeah, we are going to do a digital currency.
Of course they are. That's the way out.
But it's not going to be. Somebody asked if it was going to be like Bitcoin, like cryptocurrencies. Like, well, it'll be like it in some ways, but it won't be anonymous, and that it will take until, I think he said 2026 or 2020.
They have about 12 months.
Did he say 20? I could have that date wrong. So,
Doesn't
and then
matter.
Powell, I saw a quote him saying that he's still undecided.
Oh, he's not going. He can't go to a digital, a central bank digital currency. That's the plan. That's what the Biden administration wants to do. Remember, Biden works for Davos. Biden does not work for China. That is the big Republican lie. That's the big lie told to conservative normies to keep them in the wrong headspace. That's serious here. Biden works for Davos because Biden works for Obama, and Obama works for Davos. Always has. Obama never worked for China. But Obama did everything to make the European Union the center of global capital, to transfer power from the United States to Europe, the Paris Accords, TTIP, all of this stuff, Basel III, every bit of it. Going and telling the Brits they'll be at the back of the queue, all that kind of.
So let me just clarify in case I don't remember. So Davos is not a nation state, right? There's people from all
it's the World Economic Forum get together at Davos every year
but they are aligned more with the EU, with the ECB than they are with the Fed.
Oh, absolutely. The ECB is there is the EC the goal for them is to create global governance, right? It's to create a transnational, global, tyrannical, technocratic superstate that has no real democratic impulses associated with. The EU is the architecture for what they want to build. Very similar to what they want to build, what's already been built in China. It's already been built in the EU. They've destroyed democracy here in the United States. Not that I'm a big fan of democracy, me, anarcho-libertarian, but it's better than what they have, right? Which is a naked, unelected oligarchy. Okay. Now, the real goal here is to make Europe the center of world power. And there's only one way to do that. And you do that if it's a three-sided war, and I'm going to leave Russia out of it. If it's the US, China, and Europe is the three major economic centers, which that's why we're leaving Russia out of it. Russia's not a major economic center, at least yet. Talk to me when I'm 100 years old. I may think differently. But those three, and a three-legged, if that's your three-player game, right? How does the third player at the table, who's in third place, Europe, who's easily in third place between the US and China, how do they leap into first place? I mean, if you're playing a game, between two,
the other two,
you get the other two to fight.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Oh, you allow it to leak. You allow it to leak. Really, COVID really did leak out of a Chinese lab. And it's a China, and we don't know that it's really a Chinese bioweapon, but 65% of Americans now believe that COVID was a bioweapon set on us by China. They turned on a freaking dime. They were banning us from social media 3 weeks earlier, saying these things, and then the minute it became politically expedient for them to shift gears because they could no longer pursue a war against Russia, because the Russians basically told them, look, if you take one more step forward, we're just going to nuke you. Well, not nuke you, but we're going to take you out militarily. We're going to show the world that you are not prepared to take the Russian bear on militarily or economically, because I'm sure that Putin also threatened to back the ruble with gold. That's a different story. So now, and Xi probably backed him up as well over in China. Now, think that through. So how does Davos pivot out of this? They got to get out of the war they're in with Russia. So they send Biden over to sue for peace, at least call a ceasefire. the usual suspects will kick and scream and kick up dust here and there. Putin's not worried about them. Did you see him at his 4-hour Q&A when asked about the HMS Defenders sailing through Crimean waters? Sir, would that have caused World War III? And he laughed.
I did not. I usually do catch some of that. I didn't see it this year.
Oh, no. That Joanne, if you see that little clip went viral.
I'll watch it.
Someone asked him about that. It was like a 1-minute clip, and they asked him about it, and he laughed. He said, "No, that couldn't start World War III. That would start they know that if they started that war, they wouldn't be able to finish it." Oh, and there was an American spy plane in the area. I think the tail number is X, Y, but my defense minister might get angry with me for sharing that secret. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Oh, by the way, I have you dead to rights.
Is that where that information came from? He said it in a press conference?
No, he did it in his Q&A.
In his Q&A, right.
Yeah. No, he was laughing at the Brits and the Americans and Davos. Saying, look, you can play that game all you want, but you all know, because I just told you, that I've got Kinzhal Mach 8, Mach 9 weapons sitting on the border, ready to wipe out everybody's Navy and all the logistical points, all of NATO's logistical choke points all across Western Europe. Forget it. There's no war. And then at that point, I can take back as much of Ukraine as I want. Or I can allow as much of Ukraine that wants to join the Russian Federation to join us if they want, because most of Ukraine is ready to rejoin the Russian Federation. Not Kiev, but everything from Odessa west or east wants to go. They mean the entire northern coast of the Black Sea, along with the Moldovan enclave of Russians in Transnistria, by the way. And I still believe that whole corridor is ready and waiting to, when it's politically expedient, to come to rejoin the Russian Federation. And at that point, the Brits lose their mind.
That's the entire coastal access to,
yeah,
including all the way up, Mariupol and all that.
Yeah, so Mariupol and then Crimea and then all the way west to Odessa, right? And then
I think that's the whole coastal.
Yeah, that is the entire coast of Ukraine. Yeah. And no, Ukraine, what's left of Ukraine would be landlocked. Nobody wants, look, Merkel and the EU destroyed that country. Now they want to wash their hands of it. Okay. Victoria Nuland's not done with the region. She's dumping weapons into Ukraine and trying to smuggle them across the Belarusian border on a daily basis. Lukashenko just closed the border and everybody's losing their minds. And honestly, Lukashenko is now laughing because he doesn't have to worry about it. He's got Putin in his back pocket, because all of this pressure has just shored up relationships between all of these various satellites of Russia to realize who their friends actually are. And the Russians aren't that I can see, they're not pressing these advantages in ways to make things worse for these countries. They're actually trying to liberate them from these, like Lukashenko's a petty dictator. He's a petty guy. And, creating a union state between Russia and Belarus is only good for the Belarusians. It's, and it's only going to weaken Lukashenko. And he's already agreed to constitutional changes akin to the ones that Putin pushed through on himself in Russia last year. You're going to see the same ones propagate out to Belarusia, weakening his power, putting more power in the hands of the people, yada, yada, yada. That's already in process, by the way. So
the with the ECB, if they want to do away with commercial banks, that would be the European banks, that would be Wall Street.
It would be the big one is Wall Street.
All the big commercial banks.
So if the Fed is under the control of a guy who's with a private equity background, Jerome Powell, he's not a globalist like Yellen. He's not a globalist like Bernanke. Those guys are all, but both of them are ivory tower Fed, Ivy League bred and born globalists. Okay. Dyed-in-the-wool, Samuelsonian, post-Keynesians, whatever you want to call them. Powell is a private equity guy. He cut his teeth on Wall Street. His friends in Wall Street. I firmly believe that Jerome Powell, while no Austrian or anything like that, is still a guy that believes that we should have rational risk assessment within actual somewhat functional bond markets to invest and do big things with. That's what capitalism still is. That's the good part of capitalism, with the crony stuff that we've got going on. Some of that is still there. Still, the vestiges of that system still exist. Even within City of London, they still exist to a greater or lesser extent. But Davos wants to do away with all of it. They want to effectively nationalize all banking. Okay, hand some of the basic stuff off to like the tech companies like Google and Apple and Facebook to handle like day-to-day micropayment stuff. They don't want any of that business. What they want is control over what money you have and how you spend it. And through programmable digital currencies, which will basically just be an encrypted database controlled by the central bank, no blockchain, no audit, none of that stuff. They'll audit it themselves. They can then tie your credit score to your bank accounts, what you're allowed to buy, what you're not allowed to buy. By the way, the digital euro, you won't, not like you can buy guns anyway in Europe anyway, but imagine a digital dollar. You think you're going to be able to use digital dollars given to you by the Fed to buy a gun? You think you're going to be able to buy pizza with that? Is that air you think you're breathing? I mean, seriously. I mean, this is what they're trying to do. So can you imagine Wall Street sitting back and going, yeah, I signed up for that.
How did it get this far if it was always going to incinerate Wall Street?
They sold it to Wall Street that Wall Street was going to be able to sell them carbon credits and still manage all the money and move the money around. And no, listen, you listen very carefully to everything Lagarde says. It's all about cutting Wall Street out of the process.
Then they pull the rug out from under.
Of course. Then you reveal the curtain, as Frank Zappa said so presciently ages ago. Then they close the door behind you, pull back the curtain, and show you the brick wall behind the screen. Like you're trapped. There's no exit. These people all believe in Sartre. They don't believe in exits. They believe. I mean, Lagarde is scared to death. She said this recently. She said we have to cut off their exit strategies, otherwise they'll use them. Like, they speak with their outside voice at this point. Like, it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
So I think Wall Street and the Fed have seen what's coming. And I also don't think that I don't think everybody within the Biden administration is going along with this either. And I think that's why there's this pivot to turn on China, which is perfectly within Davos's purview. And then there's the ECB versus the Fed, which I think is only going to intensify. If I'm wrong, we'll know by Jackson Hole. If the Fed doesn't raise interest rates again at Jackson Hole, or doesn't make some move at Jackson Hole around the Fed meeting at that point, I may be wrong. But as of right now, this is what I'm seeing, because I just don't see that Wall Street's going to go gentle into that good night without, at least getting a piece of the pie. Because here's the thing: how does Klaus Schwab at this point pull off this without handing somebody to the millennials as scapegoats for all of their ennui? It's Wall Street. They're the perfect scapegoat.
They would be.
Elizabeth Warren is out there screaming for a wealth tax. Bernie Sanders is doing his thing. Like, come on, they all freaking work for Schwab. It's all a big frick. I hate to sound like the comedian from The Watchmen, but it's all a big freaking joke, and it's all right in front of you.
Yeah, the interesting thing is the CIA origins and the ties with Wall Street. I don't know what has happened to that over the years. I don't know. I think it's foolish to look at anything in terms of just nation states anymore. I think it's coalitions and factions. But it's an interesting thing to.
I mean, the intelligence agencies. Yeah, the intelligence agencies across the West, and they're all split at this point too. Look, I haven't even gotten started on the Brits. The Brits are being hung out to dry. They're the real odd man out here. Post Brexit, they're being drawn and quartered. They're being cut off from global trade. They can't cut it. They can't cut a trade deal with anybody. The Basel III is trying to gut their gold and come on and industrial metals business. And they want to transfer all the money to Frankfurt. Lagarde is talking about starting a new green stock exchange and excluding all the U.S. banks. The COVID relief fund packages, and then there's this new IMF $650 billion worth of COVID relief, that's what Macron was talking about when he said, hey, all the G7 countries should pledge their gold to the IMF so that we can get COVID relief. That was all just a big wealth transfer scheme to get Italy to give up their gold to transfer to the to the IMF. Why? Because ultimately the IMF is the goal. Turn the IMF into the world's central bank. But you got to protect, but you also got to protect the ECB in the process. Okay. Because the ECB can go bankrupt.
Oh, right. They're different than the Fed.
They're much different than the Fed. Completely different structure than the Fed. The Fed wants low gold prices in order to keep the dollar's primacy. The ECB is desperately trying to keep their sovereign bond yields from rising, because what makes up 60% of the ECB's balance sheet today? Negative yielding European sovereign debt. Think about this, right? What happens if the euro really starts to fall like it should? Bond yields are going to rise because
what does happen? Is that just a complete collapse? What happens?
Okay, this is why I said when Powell made this 5 basis point move, the euro corrected overnight, literally in 2 days, from $1.22 to $1.18. They pushed it back up to $1.18.5 or $1.19 that week, and they've been holding the $1.18 floor on a weekly closing basis since then. Desperately, by the way. We've got deterioration in core European bond maturity curves. There's big bond inversion, yield curve inversions at the 1 year and 3 year mark on the German yield curve. Same thing with the French yield curve. The French yield curve these are, again, like the French yield curve at this point is fictional. The fact that you see any of these things occurring tells you that those are actually glitches in the matrix. Because if they were trying to do it right, they would just be a perfectly upwardly sloping yield curve if they had complete control, like the BOJ has over in Japan. Like the BOJ's got yield curve control down because they've been doing it for 30 years. They're really good at it. But the ECB is incompetent at it because of its structure. And if the yields on European debt start to rise, then the ECB's balance sheet shrinks, right? Because the price of the bonds, as yields rise, the price of the bonds falls, so the value of the bonds falls. So therefore, the value of the assets held on the ECB's balance sheet, just like any other company, right? So how does the ECB offset this? But the only thing it really has, which is around 10 to 11,000 tons of gold, as owned by the various independent central banks. Now, all those central banks are in Dutch to the ECB and to the Bundesbank and everybody else who target two liabilities, OMT, and all these alphabet soup QE programs that they have. And effectively, all that gold has already been multiple times over collateralized, leveraged within the ECB's balance sheet and within the entire system. So the only way for those books to balance is for the price of gold to rise to $10,000 or $11,000 an ounce, or even higher. And so how do you do that? You collapse the paper gold market and the gold suppression scheme run between the City of London and the LBMA and the COMEX in Chicago. That's how you do it. And that's what the changes to the Basel III rules are all about, and why the Bank of England the other day had to issue an exemption to English clearinghouses in order to exempt them from these rules, in order to ensure that trade can still occur, because the BOE is without friends.
They just said, nah, we're not.
Well, they were always going to say nah, but when you stop to really look at what's going on, how angry is Davos over Brexit?
I guess they're still, still fuming over it. Yeah,
absolutely. They're absolutely livid. They still want them back. Biden went to the G7, upbraided Boris Johnson, and said, I would really like to see you get back in the customs union and the single market. Like, how's he going to do that without abrogating a treaty that's already been signed?
Yeah.
But, that never stopped these people before. Things like, treaties are only to be respected when it's, in their favor. When it's not in their favor, I just ignore the treaty and do what we want you to do. Like, that's the way these things work. So there's a real, and this difference between the way the ECB marks its gold, which is to market, so it's held on the balance sheet at the current price, around $18.15 an ounce, versus the Fed, which holds the gold. We sold it on August 15, 1971 at $42.22 an ounce. All of the US's gold is held on the Fed's balance sheet at $11.04 billion. It's worth a lot more than that. Yeah. Okay. It's worth
what is gold, like close to 2,000 now?
18. Yeah. I think it closed today at 1815, 1813, somewhere in that range. The fact that they got it below 1815 is technically significant for today, but that's,
Yeah.
I'll talk about that with my patrons on Sunday. What's important to realize here is that all of the pieces are in place here for all of these disparate factions to look at Davos not being able to keep it all together and not get global vaccine passports and not get all of this stuff done and go, you know what? I'm taking my choice and I'm going home. And if that's the case, like I said at the outset, the moment like this won't come around for another 1,000 years. You wait 2 weeks and the whole thing gets spin off into oblivion, right? And that's, in Patton's case, it was 2 weeks. In our case, it's 2 to 3 years. They've got this moment in time to pull it all off. And if they don't pull it off, they're done. That's why things like Viktor Orban threatening to veto the Green New Deal is so important. That's why Nord Stream 2 was so important. That's why all of these little things all play into how this stuff plays out. But at the end of the day, we're talking about 5 basis points change the world.
Yeah, a lot to think about there, Tom.
I know.
I'll link the podcast episodes too in here because where you go into some more detail.
Please. I worked really hard on those. I hate to pimp them. I don't normally like to pimp my own work very, very hard, but I worked really hard on that because it was a narrative so complex. I had to talk about it on a microphone for 2 hours straight. So 3 podcasts, about 40 minutes each, about 2 hours to give, first, what is Davos, and then the Biden-Putin summit, and then the Fed. And it's broken up into those 3 parts. And I review those things because I get lost every once in a while. That's how complicated this is.
Yeah. They're right here in the show notes. And like I said, the whole EU thing has been bothering me for a while, for 3-4 years now. Something's just not the way it's presented. And there was way too much. And Biden, just our allies. And McCain was the same way, our allies. And this almost worshipful thing, along with their, rules-based international order and all these things, like at really important moments, they would just say these meaningless words, pretty much. And the almost worshipful attitude toward the EU and our allies, and a perceived terrible, grave damage done to those alliances and those friendships. Like, what? Hardly anything changed.
I know.
Except so there's something else going wrong. There's something else going on. Yeah.
It's very obvious that Trump's biggest fight was over NATO funding and blowing open all of the hypocrisy within Europe. I identified that within Trump's presidency. My coverage of this wasn't particularly good, but in hindsight, I look back on it and I cringe at some of the things I wrote and some of the things I thought, yada, yada, yada. Like everything else, we do the best we can
in real time
with the information we have at the time. We look back on this stuff and it's very, very obvious. One of the things that I really appreciated about Trump was that he made this an issue. And because I never understood everybody's antipathy to the JCPOA, to the Iran nuclear deal. I never understood it. Why is this such a big deal? Yeah, Iran's not going to have nuclear weapons. Okay, maybe it's only for 10 years. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll take 10 years with Iran putting a moratorium on all uranium enrichment. Why am I angry? Why should I be upset about this? Because it was never about that. It was always about Davos getting access to cheap Iranian oil and cheap Russian gas and cutting the US and Israel out of the European gas market. It was always about that. It was about our allies negotiating with our enemies and our president negotiating with our enemies. So why are we paying all this money for NATO? That's how Trump attacked it. And that was the right tact for him. That was the right way for him to attack it, because it was an easy way for him to communicate one of the problems, not the real problem, but frame the problem in such a way that it was understandable by the people that he was trying to reach i.e. voters who would then vote for him and support him, right? He was also wrong and then trying to go one step further by going in the opposite direction, by destroying Iran, destroying Venezuela, pumping a whole lot of oil out of the United States, which was unsustainable at anything less than $70 a barrel. I could go on and on and on and on and on. But I understood why he did all of it. I disagreed with
the indicator, sort of.
Yeah, but it was an indicator that he understood the real problem, what the real problem was. Okay. And he wasn't sophisticated enough, savvy enough. He was too Donald Trump to do everything right. But he did a lot of things right in framing this way, because he's prepped everybody, including myself, to a greater or lesser extent, to see the next layer of the man behind the curtain. Because there have been multiple reveals here until the man finally revealed himself halfway through the Corona apocalypse, with the WEF coming out and saying, you will own nothing and love it.
The hell was he
or else.
That's for another conversation, but man, that was dumb. And in a German accent, when we've all grown up with the uber villains, have Russian or German accents. What were you thinking?
What are you thinking? Coming out with the friggin' Bond villain suit and saying, "Hey, let's turn the world over to a German eugenicist," because that worked out so well the first time.
I swear, I sometimes it just seems so surreal that I don't know. Anyway,
it really does. Truly,
let me throw a quick bonus question at you, if you have a little bit more time.
I do.
This is just more of a general question. So, I keep seeing all these headlines. Mm-hmm. Well, since we're on the subject of Trump and his policies, and then this supposed great shift that was going to happen when, I don't know, the things that Biden said, America's back and whatever, and now we have real leadership again. But now I keep seeing all these headlines about sanctions on China, and now some sort of grave warning from Treasury, DHS, from several different departments, warning people about doing business with China, and they frame it around Hong Kong.
Yep.
But you can see from all the other headlines that it's not. That's just
it's about Taiwan.
So
there's two angles to that question. I'm going to assume that you're going to ask me, why is this happening?
Yeah, just your thoughts on what the heck is going on. Yeah. The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some of you will join us. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up.
All right, Joanne. This has been lovely, as always.
Yeah. Tom, let's roll back into the public part of the interview and tell everybody where to find your work, how to support you, and all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, you can follow me, as always, at my blog over tomluongo.me, Gold, Goats, and Guns. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. And I, of course, have a Patreon where you can sign up for the monthly newsletter, which is a retail investors-focused investment newsletter and exclusive commentary on all the stuff that we talk about here. But that stuff goes to the subscribers first and to everybody else second. And then there's also I communicate with my patrons between 4 and 5 times a week through private blog posts and private video podcasts and whatnot. So
all right, I'll put all that stuff in the show notes too. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Take care.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Be well.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Tom Luongo. Follow him on Twitter at TFL1728. Find his work at Gold, Goats, and Guns, and on YouTube, Odyssey, and other platforms. This podcast is independent media. Listener support's really important. Rockfin.com/Around the Empire, Patreon.com/Around the Empire, or PayPal.me/Around the Empire Pod. Find it on all the mobile podcast apps, on the website AroundTheEmpire.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.